So what happens when federal law enforcement floods a city to fight a crime wave? Well, today we're going to break down exactly that. We're looking at recent operations in Washington, D.C. and Memphis, all based on a really interesting interview with the head of the U.S. Marshals Service.
You know, this one quote from the director of the U.S. Marshals really gets to the heart of the story we're exploring. The way they tell it, this isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about making streets safe enough for kids to just be kids again, to play outside.
Okay, let's get right into it. There was a huge spike in violent crime being reported in these cities, a real crisis. So, a major surge of federal law enforcement was deployed. The mission? To bring those crime rates down, and fast. Now, this key term here, federal surge, it's important to understand what that means. This isn't about setting up some new permanent police force. Think of it more like a short-term, high-intensity mission. You flood a specific area with federal agents and resources to get a handle on that sudden spike in crime. So that's the big idea. But what did this mission actually look like on the ground? Let's dig into the specifics of how this all played out in these two cities. The U.S. Marshals were the ones leading the charge here. It was their job to coordinate this incredibly complex task force, pulling together dozens of different agencies, local, state, and federal. And the scale of this collaboration is just pretty staggering. I mean, in Washington, D.C. alone, you had 30 different partner agencies all working together. That is a huge number of organizations trying to move in one direction. And D.C. wasn't a one-off. Over in Memphis, it was almost the exact same story. 31 different partners were involved. When you see numbers like that, you really start to get a feel for the immense logistical challenge we're talking about here. So why go to all this trouble? Well, according to the director, it all comes back to that first quote. The mission was framed as a direct effort to restore a sense of safety, to let people in these communities live their lives without constantly looking over their shoulder. All right, the million-dollar question, did it work? Let's take a look at how the success of this mission was measured, at least according to the interview. How did they actually quantify the impact? What's interesting is that the source we're analyzing didn't just lean on its own internal numbers. Instead, it pointed right to reports from major news organizations to show just how effective the surge was. For Washington, D.C., the statistic they highlight is pretty jaw-dropping. The interview points to the CBS News report claiming violent crime dropped by nearly 50% while federal agents were there. Now, attributing a crime drop to just one single cause is always complicated, but that was the headline figure presented as a huge success. And then for Memphis, the data pulled from the Washington Post told a similar story, but with a different focus. Here, the emphasis was on the huge number of arrests, over 2,100, and a corresponding claim that serious crimes had plummeted. But, numbers and stats can feel a little dry. To really illustrate the real-world impact of the mission, the interview zoomed way in on a single personal story from Memphis. And this is the before picture, from the perspective of a young boy. He's talking about being genuinely scared, fueled by all the news about shootings right in his area, to the point where he couldn't even really go outside and play. And then, this is the after. He says his neighborhood feels peaceful now, and because of that feeling of peace, he has the freedom to do something as simple and wonderful as practicing his trumpet on his own front porch. It's a really powerful image. But the interview also made a point to show the other side of this coin, the immense risks and the very real human cost for the officers who were on the ground making this happen. And this wasn't just some theoretical risk. The interview makes it crystal clear that to get these results, officers had to face incredibly dangerous, life-threatening situations. The director described this risk in really blunt terms, talking about a violent attack where two members of the task force were, in his own words, needlessly gunned down in an attempt on their lives. And the source puts names to this human cost: officers Sarah Beckstrom and Andrew Wolf. It notes that one of them was still fighting for his life, and it highlights the incredible response of their families, who reportedly, in the midst of all that pain, focused on thanking the task force. So that brings us to the final section. How do you tie these two incredibly powerful threads together? You've got the story of the young boy's freedom on one side and the story of the officer's immense personal sacrifice on the other. Well, the director makes the connection explicit. He basically says that the story of that boy in Memphis is the entire reason they do the work. That outcome is what fuels the team, what gives purpose to all the risks they take.
And the interview frames the efforts of the task force in really powerful language. Their actions are described as doing God's work, and their families are called great American patriots for their sacrifice and their support.
And that really brings us to the key takeaway. This whole narrative, even with all the statistics, is ultimately driven by two powerful human stories: a child getting his freedom back, and officers putting everything on the line. It leaves us with a really critical question to think about. How much do these personal stories end up shaping our entire understanding of big issues, like crime and the policies we create to deal with it?